Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the latest broken government promise, this time related to rail. As long predicted, the government have now confirmed that they do not care one jot about levelling up the north of England, and if people there voted Tory because they thought that's what they were getting, well, they haven't been paying attention to how Boris Johnson works. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, as we're talking about government promises, let's begin with what was promised so that we don't fall into the trap of perceptions. You know, it's easy for someone to listen to what a minister promises in an election and think it means one thing, only to discover that when you read the small print, it said another thing entirely. The specific promises in the 2019 Conservative manifesto were to invest in the Northern Powerhouse Rail. Now, that's quite ambiguous. That could change a lot of things. But it was quite clear there was supposed to be a link between Manchester and Leeds. There were also supposed to be the plans for HS2 in the north of England as well. But to be fair, the government dropped that promise before the 2019 general election. So you can moan at Theresa May for that one. But this rail link between Manchester and Leeds was a Boris Johnson promise, right there in the manifesto. Only it's not happening. It was never going to happen. We said this at the time. Never mind their excuses. Here is the actual issue. Investing in infrastructure costs a fair amount of money. Now, when you're a country that rarely invests in infrastructure, because we mostly elect Conservative governments who just don't do that, then it costs even more. Because when you do it, you're not just modernising, as other countries are when they do it, but you're also overhauling the systems that should have been modernised decades ago. You know, major European countries invested in high-speed rail decades ago. We're playing catch-up. So, of course, it's going to cost a lot. But costs mean having to pay for it. That means taxation, borrowing. Conservatives don't like taxation or borrowing unless the money has been funneled into their pockets somehow. And what the more traditional Conservative MPs, mostly based in the south of England, really don't want is for taxes to rise in their part of the country in order to improve the life for people elsewhere. In this case, the north of England. In fact, it's a double whammy for them because they see it as them paying taxes to help people in the north of England. And what is it to do for people in the north of England? Help them become more competitive in the job market. You know, competing directly with people in the already prosperous south of England. Finally, when you do go for it and you do spend that investment money and you work out what combination of taxation and borrowing is needed to pay for it, you won't actually see the benefits politically. A major infrastructure project, especially one that is decades behind, is going to take years to bear fruit. The short-term nature of political survival means that few governments in the UK want to take the hit for major spending because the spending has to come first. When some other bugger in 15, 20, maybe 30 years' time is in power to enjoy the benefits. There's no way that the Tories were going to invest in this Leeds to Manchester rail link any more than they will put any serious investment into generating jobs in the north with any project. It was all a wheeze to get seats in the industrial north, to get us out of the EU, to line their pockets and work on what Ken Clarke is describing as an elected dictatorship in this country. Only in this case, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than normal, because usually the way this works is the Conservatives promise great things. Of course they do. They promise everything. They fail to deliver. Of course they do, because they don't actually want to deliver anything, let alone everything. And then they promise the same things again at the next election. Like, if you look back, you can see promises in the 2010 Tory manifesto that were then repeated in 2015, in 2017, in 2019. They'll be repeated in the next one. They'll never be achieved. I mean, why would you want to achieve a promise that's so appealing when you can just keep using it for every election? I mean, if you actually did it, you'd have to come up with a new promise. That's silly. But this time, there are so-called Red Wall Tory MPs to consider. They needed this. They promised their voters this in 2019. They've spent 2 years saying, of course Boris Johnson's going to keep his word. Of course he is. You can trust Boris. And they've been silly enough to stand by this. It's a cast iron manifesto commitment that was plastered all over their campaign leaflets 2 years ago. It's not hidden in some dark recesses of the manifesto that no one's read. It was on their campaign leaflets. This is going to be more than a little tricky for them to explain come the next general election. And like I pointed out before, many of these Conservative MPs do not have large majorities. They're in towns and cities that do not traditionally vote Conservative. They sneaked it based on a combination of Brexit, not liking Corbyn, Johnson's promises of shiny things to come. Well, at the next election, there's not a lot left to promise with Brexit. And Corbyn isn't around. So it's really all down to the shiny things, isn't it? And one of these Tory MPs asked a question of the Transport Minister, Grant Shapps. Good luck with that. There are some interesting expressions in this. First thing I noticed was the MP sat next to her was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Not actually sure who it was. Wasn't worth my time to try and find out. But her question was about rail links in the north. She described how in her neck of the woods, a rail journey of 25 miles can take an hour or 2.5 hours at peak times. She asked the minister to set out how the government's announcement will achieve levelling up in communities like hers. Now, before I get on to Shapps' comedy answer, I want to focus on her words. She said, how does the announcement achieve levelling up? That's the key phrase. She's not trying to say something to get a response to take back home to her constituents and persuade her voters that it's all fine. Because that's what some of them are doing. Some of them are going, oh crap, we've had the rug pulled on for us. But they're trying to still back home, build it up as the government actually, yeah, okay, they're not keeping that promise, but they're actually going to do something just as good or better. They're going to try and put lipstick on the pig there. This one's not. She was calling the minister out. How does the announcement help my community level up? Because if Shapps did not tell her how the announcement levels up her community, then her community isn't going to be levelled up. At which point she is unlikely to retain her seat, or at least it would be extremely challenging. And this is just one issue. You know, you've got the broken promise on something that was strongly linked with levelling up. You then have the corruption scandals. You then have the failures over COVID, the damage being done by Brexit. These MPs do not have safe seats that allow them to weather these storms, so they are less likely to sit back and take it. This particular MP, Sarah Brickcliffe, won a 7%. She won her seat with 7% lead over the Labour predecessor. 7%. It's easily gone on one issue alone if it's a big issue, never mind the others. And think about all the other MPs that Boris Johnson used to get his Brexit done that cannot afford to let this go. If they cannot persuade their constituents that their Tory vote brought them some infrastructure improvements, much needed for future prosperity, those votes will be withdrawn and respent along the traditional Labour lines of those communities. Boris Johnson has now sunk them. They have got no option now, but they're not going to change this now. The commitment has been made. Their only chance now is to hoodwink those people into thinking that something is going to come. But anyway, Shapps' response was to bang on about smart ticketing and how this marvellous new system would mean you can save money and get money back on flexible ticketing options. What on earth have tickets got to do with the duration of the rail journey? An hour to go 25 miles at off-peak times. 2.5 hours at peak times. And make no mistake, the way better rail links helps level up a community is by letting people get to and from work across a greater distance. So we're talking about peak times here. That's what actually matters. So you're talking 2.5 hours to go 25 miles. You could cycle that. That's a piss take in anyone's books. A clever ticket isn't even part of the solution to that problem. And you can see our expression just told her that. She wasn't impressed with this at all. And the north-south links are also knackered by this announcement because it was pointed out that the Newcastle to London route would be 11 minutes slower than the original plans and that Newcastle to Birmingham would be 50 minutes slower. That's levelling down, Noel. So what high-speed rail is finally coming to the country after decades of nothing at all is only going to benefit the south. In other words, this Tory investment is going to be for the already prosperous south, creating an even larger gulf between the haves and have-nots. And this should be a huge blunder for the Conservatives. Seriously, this should be the sort of strategy that costs them the next election. Johnson's populism and culture wars are turning away moderate Conservatives in their heartlands. This is likely to cost the Conservatives some formerly safe seats. It already has in a by-election earlier this year. North Shropshire, which is the seat vacated by the disgraced Owen Paterson, is also safe. But there is talk of concern amongst the local Conservative Party about the challenge posed by the Liberal Democrats there. In fact, there are a few by-elections coming up that might be interesting. So the Conservatives look set to lose some seats in the South, at least when the election comes around. I'm not saying definitely when these by-elections come around. But if they don't deliver on the levelling up promises, they'll also lose seats that they borrowed in the North. You know, from a non-partisan strategic viewpoint, this rail announcement from the government looks like madness. No wonder Johnson refused to answer Starmer's questions on it the previous day, though I imagine those questions will be back again next week. And Tory MPs need to consider something here. Boris Johnson has now given Labour a second avenue of attack. Both the corruption issue and the rail promises broken were not brilliant tactical play by Labour. They haven't cornered the Conservatives. They were own goals by Boris Johnson. Neither should have been an issue, but both are. And there'll be others as well. Johnson never had any substance and now he's completely losing the plot. I'm starting to believe that he cannot possibly win the next election. And I wonder how quickly Conservative MPs will start to think the same. But I may continue this theme in another video. For now, suffice to say that we never really believed the government's promises on levelling up because it's far too much money for a Conservative government to spend on, people. And it has now been confirmed. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.